Welcome to Black is the New Orange. OzDox is the Australian Documentary Forum. We meet once a month, usually the second week, Wednesday or Thursday in the month, but sometimes, depending on the panel, it gets delayed a week or so. But anyway, I want to thank Georgie McClean for agreeing to moderate this wonderful panel. She's the Senior Manager of Strategy and Communications at Screen Australia. Old habits die hard. She's got over 10 years experience in arts and the media industry, including many years managing policy research and community engagement at SBS. And so over to you, Georgie.
So I would like to thank, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. So we are here with this very full panel to talk about how we tell Indigenous stories in 2015. As Pet mentioned, we are being filmed. It's going to go viral on YouTube, I'm sure. And I've been warned by Alan that some of our clips may go a little bit funny up there on the screen, so you might have to bear with us a little bit. We're here to talk about good practice in collaboration around Indigenous stories and some of the potential pitfalls. And we have a stellar panel to help us do this. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, but we'll be hearing a little bit of these guys' experiences, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the car crashes in a moment. So first I'd like to introduce you to Penny Smallacombe, who, maybe everyone could just wave, because I'm not going to do this in order, it's a bit annoying. She's a member of the Maramanindji people, an Indigenous group in Northern Australia. She started off with a cadetship at the ABC and has a Master of Arts in documentary producing from AFTRS, so she's an alumni of this great institution. She has worked as a producer-director with Message Stick on the ABC and produced the ABC's highly successful Yarning Up Series 1 and 2. She was also part of Screen Australia's Indigenous Department's Producers Initiative in 2007. Most recently, she was a senior programmer for the National Indigenous Television Station, NITV, and is now heading up our Indigenous Department at Screen Australia. She also completed a 2-year stint in Japan, following me. We had this very kind of parallel life for several years, teaching English, and she spent short periods in New York getting acquainted with the many Indigenous people's efforts that take place within the United Nations. Over this end of the panel, mixing it up, is Sam Griffin. She's an investment manager in documentary unit for Screen Australia. She's been involved in the development and funding of PUTUPARRI, First Contact 2, which we're going to hear a little bit about today, Black As, ABC, and Zach Ceremony. Prior to her move back to Australia, Sam was a television producer in New York. We're getting a bit of a theme here. Darren Dale, who is just to Sam's right. Don't know what your New York connections are, Darren, but he is currently on the board of Screen New South Wales. Oh, really? Oh, God. We can talk about those at drinks after, maybe. And the Council of Australian Film, Television and Radio Schools, so here again. And in 2012 was a recipient of the prestigious AFTRS honorary degree. Another alumni. Darren has produced a number of award-winning documentaries, including First Contact, First Australians and The Tall Man. Darren is currently producing another 3 by 52-minute documentary series for SBS, DNA Nation. Jacob Hickey, to his right, is a factual series producer and director whose recent credits include Inside the Firestorm, Dirty Business, How Mining Made Australia, Once Upon a Time in Cabramatta, Immigration Nation and First Contact. Dena, who is sitting next to Jacob, has both created and commissioned, Dena Curtis, I'm sorry, I should give you your full name, Dena. It's both first name, it's like Cher or Madonna. Has both created and commissioned a number of Indigenous programs. In 2009, she premiered short film Jacob at Message Stick's International Film Festival. It later went on to win the Adelaide Gold Shorts Award and the WOW Film Festival Best Drama. During her 3 years at the ABC, Dena oversaw the production of documentaries such as Buckskin, Yagan 88, The Redfern Story, Outside Chance and Wild Kitchen. Last year, she series directed the narrative comedy program 8MMM Aboriginal Radio with some of the other fabulous women on our panel. She's also recently completed her fourth short film, Nan, and A Whole Lot of Trouble, and is currently developing a slate of both factual and drama content. Sorry, I have a slide to tell you more about these people. Trisha Morton-Thomas, who is next to Dena there, was born in the Northern Territory. She wears many hats. She is a writer, producer and actor who's worked in film and television for over 20 years. She also has a background in radio broadcasting, journalism and theatre, just to round that out. Trisha trained in the Uta Hagen technique of acting at the Eora Centre for Performing Arts in Chippendale and has worked with some of the most celebrated directors in film, television and theatre, including Rachel Perkins, Warwick Thornton, Wayne Blair, Stephen Page, Noel Tovey and Nigel Jamieson. Straight out of drama school, she landed the lead character May in Rachel Perkins' 1997 debut feature film Radiance. In more recent years, Trisha has appeared in the award-winning ABC drama series Redfern Now, Series 1 and 2, and as the formidable Auntie Mona, and most recently as Lola in 8MMM Aboriginal Radio, the first Australian Aboriginal narrative comedy series which she also wrote and produced as well as starred in. This woman has many talents. Trisha's also worked for the Central Australian Media Association, CAMA, where she produced, directed and wrote documentaries and short drama for Imparja Television and SBS. At the end of the panel here, we have Rachel Clements. She has produced award-winning documentaries, including Big Name No Blanket, Blown Away and Ochre and Ink. She has executive produced documentaries commissioned by ABC and NITV, including Arapay, is that how I say it? Arapaya, sorry. Messenger, the launch documentary for NITV. Rachel has also produced drama series including 8MMM Aboriginal Radio, the first Aboriginal narrative comedy series, and Double Trouble, the first Aboriginal children's drama series. So join me in welcoming our fabulous panel. Okay, so I am going to kick us off. You're going to hear my voice just for a little bit longer with a little bit of data, which is always an exciting way to begin. So what we're seeing here, produced by the fabulous research team at Screen Australia, is trends by decade of the numbers of projects with Indigenous filmmakers in key roles: producer, director, writer, director of photography. And tracked in there a few of the key milestones that happened through these decades. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list of those milestones. For example, Walpuri Media was just the first of many community organisations to develop and facilitate production in remote Aboriginal communities. But they do give you a sense of the structural changes that were happening with the growth in number of projects with Indigenous creative control. And as you can see, particularly in documentary, that change has been exponential. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Penny, who'll give us a bit more of a detailed sense of the history that's got us to where we are today. The next slide we're looking at here counts the number of people credited in at least one of the key roles: producer, director, writer or DOP. So the first slide was projects, this is people during those decades. A person may be represented in more than one decade, but we have seen exponential growth, particularly in documentary and shorts. So this kind of data is all available on the Screen Australia website. It's collated from our Indigenous credits analysis that's updated regularly and published on the research, under the research part of the site. So in reporting these figures, Screen Australia defines Indigenous projects as those that are made under Indigenous creative control, which we think is the appropriate way to define them. But as we know, there's also a lot of projects that are being made about Indigenous subjects that have little or no Indigenous input or control, and we'd like to talk about those too. So black is the new orange. Indigenous stories are so hot right now. Filmmakers from a range of backgrounds are seeking to tell stories with Indigenous content. From our perspective, these should always be collaborations with Indigenous people with the authority to share or tell those stories. So how do we get that right? And what are some examples of where it's been done really well and pretty badly? So I'm now going to hand over, in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Sam Griffin, who'll be taking us through some of our protocols that we have at Screen Australia about how to approach this process. But as I said, we're very fortunate to have on our panel some very prolific and very skilled filmmakers who can take us through some of the experiences, good and bad. First though, I will ask Penny to give us a bit more of a detailed history of where we find ourselves today from the early days of ethnographic filmmaking and voice of God style works. And she's going to play a couple of clips thanks to our lovely friend up the back here, Alan. Thanks. I'll hand to Penny.
Thank you, Pat. Look, I don't want to give everybody a history lesson of Indigenous filmmaking or how Indigenous people have been portrayed over the last 100 years. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview, really, and mention a few sort of titles and a few different things that have happened which have allowed for more Indigenous filmmakers and storytellers in this country. But if we look back, the 1920s to the 1960s, where there was the first portrayal of Indigenous people in films and documentaries, some of the very early films, Uncivilized by Chappelle in 1963 and Bitter Springs in 1950, it's the representation of an Aboriginal people was, very inappropriate, and that basically that they were a violent force of nature, and weren't really depicted as being human, which I think most people are aware of these early films. If you haven't seen them, they're very hard to get a hold of anyway. I tried to. But we sort of move on to Jeddah in 1955, which is a bit of an ambivalent portrayal of Indigenous people. With kind of an undercurrent of a message that's argued about, but the message being that, Aboriginal people won't survive assimilation. These very early films, the depiction was very much from a white perspective, unloading their thoughts and authority and, stories of Indigenous people without having any Indigenous people or key creatives a part of that filmmaking process. In the 1970s, there was, of course, the Australian film industry boom. Films like Walkabout in 1971 and Storm Boy in 1976. These aren't all documentaries, these are also dramas. Portrayed Indigenous people as helpful and knowledgeable kind of about the land. So those were those early portrayals, but also still very mysterious, Then we had films like Backroads in 1997 by Philip Noyce, which were, some of the very early films to openly discuss racism, although Backroads probably wasn't as successful commercially as Walkabout and Storm Boy. But there were some early collaborations between Gary Foley and Philip Noyce, although that's argued from time to time, depending if Gary was in the room, he might have a very different perspective. And then I really wanted to just sort of touch on, just to give you a bit of context, the first sort of real collaborations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous filmmakers. And I don't have any expertise on this subject matter. In fact, Pat Fisk and Martha Ansara, and there's quite a few other people in the room, they're actually a part of these, really, what I think are fantastic kind of films coming out in the 70s with great collaboration. And I guess one of them that I really wanted to mention, firstly I'll mention Bruce McGuinness, who was one of the first Indigenous filmmakers, and his film Backfire in 1972. But as Martha Ansara is here, I might ask her if she wants to sort of talk a little bit about that collaboration. But a film by Essie Coffey, My Survival as an Aborigine, in 1979, which was directed by Essie, was a really pivotal collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous filmmakers, and it was one of the first, and there were a few films that really highlighted the Indigenous experience from an Indigenous perspective.
As I said, that Australia is one great big black Australia before white man came in over 200 years ago and took it off us. The people just travel around, the Aboriginal people. They just travel around and walk about where they wanted to go. My people came down from the Warrego Ranges, the Murrawari tribal people, in the New South. That Dena was one of the biggest tribal ground belonged to the Murrawari people. My people, they hunted and lived with the land at Dena. But now my people own nothing. White man took my people from that land. They took the land off us. They trucked my people out in government trucks. They trucked them over to Angladu. Angladu Station was the next big camp. Before that move was on, there was a big camp just out from Hospital Creek. That's where they killed the Aboriginal people off there. My people was hungry. They trespassed on the white man property but black man land. And they speed a calf and they killed it to feed the rest of the tribe. When the squatters at that time found out it was Aboriginal people that killed the calf, they just called and arrested the troopers, and they slaughtered the Aboriginal people off just for killing one calf.
So, while we're just quickly here, Martha, would you mind just telling us just a little bit about how this film came about, how Essie was one of the first Indigenous directors?
Oh, I was a student at the film school, and Phil Noyce, who had been a student before, was making a film with Gary Foley, as was mentioned. And I wanted to be the camera assistant with Russell Boyd, but Russell Boyd had his camera assistant. And so I came along to do the sort of everything that wasn't. We made films with very small crews then, 7, 8. Kevin Smith was there, some of you might know who he was. And anyway, we were in Brewarrina, and Essie was in the film, Phil's film, and there was a bit of a dispute, which Phil said I'd stirred up the natives, sort of thing, as if. And so I said to Essie, oh, don't worry, we'll make our own film. And I gave her a special ring that my mother had given me, which she lost, of course. But, and I said, I'll be back. So the day came to go back. I decided, well, I'll just go back. Now, in those days, there weren't telephones, none. There wasn't even the telephone box at Dodge City, which was where Essie lived and her family. I got off the train at Dubbo, I got on the bus, and there was Essie and her whole family sitting in the back, about 10 of them. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay. And we went to Brewarrina, and I said, well, what are we going to do? I wanted to make a Western. She didn't. She had something all written out that was a story she'd written. And I said, well, if you come down and get the money, we'll make the film. And so she came to Sydney, to the Film Commission, and if you saw this, you'd see. And in effect, she stood up, and there was all these big men in there, and she said, and she was as big as them, and she said, I'm big and black, and this is my little friend, give us the money. So that's how we got the money. And so then I went there. But the reason I made the film with her was that I was new to film crews, and I didn't fit in. I was mussy-haired, and my shirts were uneven lengths. You know, I had a flannel shirt, and I was, And there were all these people that had mussy hair and shirts that weren't the right length. And they were really nice to me. And so that's why I made the film. And I've always had a very personal connection with people, not always, but as in best, to make the film. And because I really only wanted to be a cinematographer, well, that's what I liked. And cinematographers try to watch people and do what they say, what they want. And so that's how we came to make the film. And we cut it in Sydney, and she'd come down every so often for a Lands Trust meeting, and she'd give her comments, and we'd, do it, and then we did it, and then later she actually said, come back about 17 years later, come back and shoot something, and I didn't trust her, so I borrowed bloody Tom Zabricki's Super 8, High 8 video camera, which was shocking, and I shot what I thought was going to be just a home movie, but we made another film. So, yeah. But you see, I did the same with other people. It wasn't any different. So, what I think is that you're going to make the film the way you are, and that you can't tell yourself what to do. You have to be what you are and do it that way. And, you can't, we're having a panel, but how can we tell people what to be? So I know that's a bit confused, but yeah.
Thanks, Martha. So, certainly you can just sort of see the Essie's voice, and I think it's a really pivotal film because Essie determined how her community was going to be represented. And this was sort of the first of quite a few films where Indigenous people were actually had the authority to tell stories, which is really important. Just quickly moving through history because I don't want to waste too much time so we can talk about now. But just to go on into the 80s was definitely a period of what we would say more awareness in filmmaking. And another great film that I really will mention that if you haven't seen you should is Lousy Little Sixpence, which was made in 1982 and collaborated by Alec Morgan and Lester Bostock, which is a really great first person's account of stolen wages. I might just show just a quick little 1-minute clip from the start of that, Lousy Little Sixpence.
I was born at Warren-Gesda, and about, it'll be 74 years ago, on the Maramanindji. My mother taught us a lot, and she was of the Murray River tribe. My 2 sisters were born on the Murray River, and 2 of us were born on the Maramanindji. But we used to love to get with the old people. It was out on a summer night especially, and they'd sing in the old language, and with the teachers to do the corroboree. Our people were like one big family.
Yes, we had quite a good social life.
That's okay, we might just leave it there. I recommend, if you haven't already seen Lousy Little Sixpence, that you should definitely see it. It's a really fantastic historical film. But other titles in the 80s that provided more awareness, where there was definitely a lot more collaboration between non-Indigenous and Indigenous filmmakers. Just some of the other Wrong Side of the Road in 1981, Australia Days, which Pat Fisk directed in 1988. Towards the end of the 80s, there was a real shift in terms of just different things occurring that allowed for more Indigenous filmmakers. Karma, the establishment of Karma in Central Australia was a really important part of allowing more voices to come through, more Indigenous voices from Central Australia. And in 1993, the AFC Australian Film Commission established its first Indigenous Department. So before that time, it was extremely hard for Indigenous people to access funding towards their films. So those pathways were really opened up in the 90s. And just, 2000 is sort of onward and upwards, really. 2001, the Bush Mechanics, great collaboration between Warlpiri Media, Francis, David Batty. There was also the establishment of the Indigenous Unit at ABC. Actually, that was a little bit earlier in the 90s. SBS programs like Living Black, which I think Darren worked for. And then, of course, First Australians in 2008. And going forward, you can see the sort of content that we now have on our screens and how it's evolved over time. So just wanted to give you a little bit of context of how and why those numbers have increased over the years. And also, just to remember that those collaborations that occurred were very important in the 70s, and from those early collaborations and from the establishment of Indigenous departments at a lot of our funding agencies, we now have this abundance of Indigenous filmmakers, which means that we're in a position where we can tell more of our own stories.
Thank you, Penny, and thanks, Martha. We could have called this session "I'm Big and Black and Here's My Little Friend," couldn't we? We're going to sort of kick off with a bit of process and then get into the conversation with the rest of the panel about their experiences. And I'm going to ask Sam, who is an investment manager with us in the documentary team, get a bit of the Screen Australia stuff out of the way. So, Sam, say I'm an Indigenous filmmaker and I want to bring a project that has some Indigenous content to you. What should I do to ensure my project is, firstly relevant, and to ensure that I don't get rejected? What is the process?
Great question, Georgie. We haven't been through this before. The first thing that we would say at Screen Australia to anybody bringing in a project, particularly, really to anybody bringing in any project, is to call an investment manager. And there's 3 of us, and we're all here. Jessica's over there, and Lisa's right here, and myself. And that's our job, is to talk to filmmakers in advance of bringing in their application and talk through the project, see what concerns there might be and how we can help you. So that would be my first recommendation. And then hopefully if you've identified, ideally you've identified that this is a project with Indigenous content, it may be that it wasn't so obvious to you and we need to bring that up. And then we will suggest to you that you go away, find an Indigenous consultant that works on the project. That in and of itself is a complex process, I suppose, like finding the right person who is appropriate for that project. And there may be more than one person, more than one community. There's quite often, several communities involved in these projects. Chances are, if you're making a documentary in Australia, that it will involve some kind of Indigenous content. So hopefully you go away and you figure that out in the time that it takes you. And like I said, it's not a quick process. And then you come back to us with a better informed project that's ready to come in for either development or production investment. So when you come into us, you have to fill out the application. These are some of the questions that you'll have to address. And then you will also have to give us signed evidence that you've been consulting with somebody or more than one person, or whatever the scope of the project is. And then we also need to see a strategy statement from that person. And you don't need to take pictures because this is all of this information's come from our Pathways and Protocols, which is on our website. One of the questions that I get asked quite a lot is, can you send me the template for that evidence, or that evidence of consultation, or the statement, the strategy? And of course there is no template for that. There's no boilerplate. We have to see that there's genuine consultation here with the right people that works for your project. And every project's different. So, there's 1,000 projects and 1,000 different ways to strategise on that. When the project comes into us, hopefully well-formed, well-shaped with the right team around it, everything gets assessed by 2 assessors, and one of those will be somebody from the documentary unit, and then there'll also be an assessor from the Indigenous unit. So these are some of the things that the Indigenous assessor is looking for. So at the end of the day, these are the key issues that we like to see addressed. We're basically looking to see respect for Indigenous culture, heritage, people and communities. That's the whole goal with our insistence on the consultation process. And there's some more information there.
So all of that it was pretty whipped through there, Sam, but it is all available in the Indigenous protocols that are available on the screen. We are, we were trying to whip through that bit. Yeah. But they're all available. It does not ever happen that quickly.
Here for any longer.
No, that's good. Take a seat. And we'll talk about.
I'll just quickly jump in and just sort of say that one thing that people don't realise is when you come into Screen Australia for funding. And even though I work in the Indigenous Department and Sam works in documentary, or whether you're going into production investment or development, the Indigenous Department looks at every single application with any Indigenous themes, characters or stories. We look at it, it's a big part of what we do, and we can spot what is authentic and what is genuine pretty fast. So yes, because your address is on the application. No.
So we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about the consultants and that whole process of making sure you're talking to the right people about your project. But I might kick off with you, Darren, because you have a lot of experience in consultation, including 7 years of consultation for a big landmark documentary series you produced for SBS, First Australians. So we'll look at a clip of that in a minute, but before we do, I'd love to hear from you how you went about initiating that process and what that process was like, and what some of those hurdles were, because I know it was quite an involved series of conversations, and 7 years is a long time in development.
Like, I guess the first thing that I want to say is something that Marcia Langton is someone who we worked with on that series, and she said this thing to us really early on. Like, I was terrified of meeting Marcia, as I'm sure lots of people who know her. So I was really terrified, and we had this strange dinner in Alice Springs at the casino, and we went and met Marcia, and we were sitting across the table, and she was just sort of peering at Rachel and I like this, going, and we were talking a lot and talking excitedly. And she said something which I think is very true. She said, there have been a lot of instances where white people, non-Indigenous Australians, have helped us give us back our history, talking about Henry Reynolds, or like the collaborations that have happened, and sort of that's what we're here to talk about tonight. And I thought that was really a good starting point. She said, you cannot deny their white non-Indigenous people's role in sort of bringing us our history, and they've done this great thing for us. And so when you make this film, First Australians, you shouldn't do the same thing that's been done to us. And I thought that was really just a good way to approach how we'd go forward. So, and I guess one thing I'd like to say is that there have been great people who've really assisted Indigenous filmmakers get to where we are at this point. And, you know, a lot of those people are here and they've been talked about, but Martha and Pat Fisk, but Tom Zabricki has worked on lots of documentaries and worked with Darlene, you know, on a film that they made together. Kim Batterham, who worked with us on First Australian. So I think, you know, there have been people who have been really significant in sort of helping us tell our stories. And I guess First Australians was a time where SBS really put a lot of money, like $500,000. It's always good to hear the detail and what happened. And they put a lot of money in the consultations. And so Rachel Perkins, they came to her and said, how can you tell the history of Indigenous Australia? And we were like, God, how do you do that? Because it was a daunting task. How do you go and talk to people? Because we knew that there was a process, and to honestly and sort of have a proper engagement. We spent 2 years going around the country and talking to communities and talking about their ancestors that we might betray. And we sat there with people and we did like multiple things, like when we had sort of, and we went down some crazy wacky paths. Like at the start, we talked about making it a series of sort of essay-based films, and then we met with Ken Burns and he said, no, make it like chronologically and just sort of tell a history from, you know, a point in time. And obviously that's, you know, when white people arrived, and go to an end point. So, and we went around the country and we just sat with people, and sometimes that meant us reading out scripts for people who couldn't read scripts. You know, we'd sit with elders, and and in Central Australia we'd be showing people photographs of their ancestors that they'd never seen. So it was kind of varied, and I guess that's the main thing I'd say, is that there's no sort of, you know, get a template and say this is what you do. It's about having a sort of real engagement with people and sitting and just talking and spending time with people. And unfortunately, that time, you have to put in that time, and, you know, it costs money, and people need to be paid. But it is just a thing that I think is deeply rewarding, and something that enriches the projects that you make, and it gives them real substance and gives them real meaning, because there feels like they're... And so on First Australians, we then took those films back to the communities and showed them and screened them, and took on their comments at rough cut stage, and then, you know, we finalised the films and we showed them lock off. So I know it seems like a really long and truncated process, but what that meant at the end is, like, of course, and I guess another thing to say is, of course, people will still, there is the possibility that people will still be unhappy. And, you know, you can have the best process, but at the end of the day, people still may not necessarily agree with you. But I think you've just got to go into that process being honest and transparent and really committed to it. I think that's the thing. You've got to be committed and put in the time and hear what people have to say. And I think that was an absolute gift and an honour to make that project. It's something that I think Rachel and I, you know, of course, are incredibly proud of. But more than that, it was kind of one of those things that happens once in a lifetime. I think that you're deeply honoured to be able to go and sit and spend that time with people. And it taught me as much about myself as the communities that we sort of went and worked with. So First Australians, it's like a therapy session.
Yeah, well, let's watch a bit. Alan, have you got that queued up? That's off the USB.
Before the dreaming, the Australian continent was a flat, featureless place, devoid of life. Then giant beings came down from the sky, came from across the sea and emerged from within the earth. With their arrival, the dreaming began and life was born. In the north of Australia, the Junkawal sisters gave birth to humanity. In Central Australia, Itakawara broke the marriage laws and as punishment was turned into stone, forever entombed in the landscape. On the east coast, Byami shaped the landscape, and when his work was complete, he stepped onto a mountain and back into the sky. As they moved across the land, their giant bodies shaped the earth, creating rivers and mountain ranges. In everything they touched, they left their essence, making the landscape sacred to those who honour the dreaming, the first Australians.
I was working at SBS when that was delivered, and I just remember the excitement of just this incredible thing that had come through such a genesis. I mean, it was, you know, and I remember also writing board papers, requesting more money for it through the time, and not everyone quite getting what was coming, and then just how exciting it was. And it's still being used in schools everywhere. It's this great resource.
Absolutely, it's used a lot.
Dena, you worked on it as well, didn't you, in the online component? And
yeah, I cut there was a whole lot of mini stories that went on the online. And so
about 200 of them.
200.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't cut all of them, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But yeah,
She
I spent a
cut a
few
lot.
months cutting I think I did about 80 of them.
What was your experience of working on that?
It was fantastic. I got to, work with all the material that had been filmed over the 2 or 3 years that they were working, and it was just, highlighting particular people or moments that we could eventually, incorporate into a big timeline and stuff on the website. So it was great learning about, people you've never heard of, or and dreaming stories and looking at places and country and all that sort of stuff.
Fantastic. So Darren, now you're working with Jacob, including on First Contact, and we'll play a clip of this in a moment. Jacob, how did you come to work together with Blackfella, and what have been your major lessons?
I came to work with Blackfella, but Darren and I actually met at AFI's awards ceremony. Was it AFI's or Actors anyway? We managed not to win anything that year, didn't we? And celebrated afterwards and had an alternatives awards ceremony and decided what awards we should have won.
Right.
So that's how we
presented them to each
presented
other.
them. I made a tremendous speech. It went on. I can do it again if you like.
Rachel Perkins was the host, and she presented the awards that she thought should have been given out.
I'd love to have some footage of that. We could put that on the OzDox site, I'm sure,
So that was a great success. So no, we met then, and I'd been making some stuff for SBS up until that point, and obviously they'd been making some great stuff. So it was fantastic to join the team and then set about this very ambitious series with SBS First Contact. So it was interesting watching today in the office, actually, watching the two things side by side, just one after another when we were preparing the clips, and watching the two pre-titles and realising, that thing that Darren was saying before, it's time, and that you can make two very, very different shows, but the principles are, identical in terms of sitting, talking, listening, which I sometimes find difficult, because, when we're passionate about what we do, we like to talk about what we're doing and selling our ideas and the film that we want to make and the series we want to make, and actually having the opportunity to sit in communities and listen, even though we're making something that is a highly constructed piece of television, which is probably a debate for another day, but about documentaries and how they've evolved and changed, and that documentary can mean something quite different now, and that can mean that, like I say, there's a construct. It's an interesting thing, the dynamic of that you have a very, very strong idea, a narrative idea, and yet the consultation is the same. You're wanting people to give their story back to you to feed back into a constructed documentary series, which seems like that wouldn't work, but hopefully it did.
And it felt a bit similar to when we did First Australian, saying we're going to make this history series, and people were like, "What do you do? What are you doing? What your history series? Use photographs and like how are you going to film all that?" And in a way, First Contact felt like doing that again, because we were going there saying, "We're going to bring these white people to your community, and they're going to have views about you." So it felt like again, people was like, "What are you making? What are you doing? Why are you doing that?"
I think when you make something maybe that's, I don't want to claim new, nothing's new, but you know that might be provocative, as First Contact was. I think that's another interesting path to go down, because the principle remains the same: the honesty, the transparency with which you go about how you work, and I think that was crucial, and I think that's crucial for all of us, and I'm sure we all feel the same way about that. That actually it's all on the table from the outset, and it's a long process of consultation, and it's very important to lay it on the line right from, you know, there's no fudging. You know, at the end of the day, we were going into communities and saying, this is what we're doing, and we're going to bring 6 people, and some of them will have views that you may find abhorrent, and this is your opportunity to respond and tell your story and your platform to do that.
So
what do you think?
What were the responses you were getting when you went in there and said, "I want to do this"? What were people saying to you?
Like I was really surprised. Most people were like, "Bring them, like let's come to the community. Let's have that conversation. Let's talk about it," which was sort of interesting, because we thought, especially in. Look, all the range, the responses, like people were really enthusiastic. I was shocked. I thought like there wasn't one place that we went. It took a year and a half though. Like we spent a year and a bit talking to people, and we went back 3 times to every place, and I went back everywhere before we filmed. And so it took a long time, but people were genuinely. There wasn't one place we went to that didn't participate in the series, which I thought that we would have to go to more communities than what we filmed in.
Because of course you don't know at that point whether it's actually possible, and it was absolutely crucial that even though it's interesting, isn't it, who was the show about, the 6 people or the Aboriginal people, and I believe that actually, you know, did a good job at actually giving, like I say, that platform for Aboriginal people to tell their story from their point of view, which was intriguing to watch that happen. And as Darren said, more than one person sort of clapped their hands and went, "Bring it on, it's about time," that we haven't had the opportunity to put it directly back to the people that we've heard this from. You know, that was that interface that
I think a lot of people felt that they know people felt these things about them and views about them, but they hadn't had time to talk about it.
Yes.
That's like Channel 9 talking.
Yeah, sorry.
I was trying to think of a question to ask. I was going to try and stand in, but I couldn't think of a thing.
I will do that in a second, Pat. Just a sec. So I guess in developing that, I mean, you're talking about the platform being those 6 people. Was that a deliberate strategy in terms of providing a way in for an audience that you wanted to connect with that was beyond?
I mean, John Godfrey's here somewhere. SBS.
Looking like he wants to disappear into the floor. Hi, John.
But you know, SBS, you know, make very noisy, smart, provocative shows that get people talking, and I think that, you know, that was a remit, absolutely, and bring it to a wider audience. And you know, something Darren and I talked a lot about before is that we're, you know, kind of where I came from, you know, want as many people to watch the show as possible. Yeah. And we wanted to bring something that dealt with these issues, but took it to places that maybe they hadn't been taken before.
And I guess also, like, we'd made, you know, films, for instance, in between First Australians, like The Tall Man, which, you know, is a film that I'm incredibly proud of, and you make that film for a year and a half, and I spent like 5 months on Palm Island making that film with the family, the Doomadgee family, and, you know, getting police to talk to us, and, you know, lawyers and coroners and all of that stuff. And they're important in different ways, and films like that don't necessarily go out to a big audience. You know, like you toil over this film and you think, God, why don't fucking people want to engage with this really important issue? And then you get those numbers back the next day and it's like 160,000 people watched it. And you can't help but feel a little bit, if you're not being honest with yourself, you can't help but feel, oh God, like I really feel that this issue, like why do they treat Aboriginal people like this on Palm Island like now? This is why are we all outraged about this? And I guess there's different ways. I guess what I've learned, I've learned is that there is very different sorts of ways that you can approach content, which is about justice and which is about advancing, you know, or saying something about contemporary Australia and Aboriginal people's role in it. I think that there's just different ways to come at that, and there'll be disagreement amongst Aboriginal people about if that's a good or a bad thing. There'll be disagreement amongst the wider population about whether that's a good or bad thing, and I think that is a good thing.
But you're saying the common thread is the honesty, the transparency, the engagement, the time, the listening. That's whatever the form,
Whatever the content,
whatever the form, whatever the genre, whatever the kind of ways in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you feel it was successful in what you're setting out to do?
First contact. Yeah, look, I think it was. It got people talking. It was, you know, in Twitter, it was like, you know, top trending for 3 nights in a row. It trended number 4 in the world. It was on the SMH. At one point we had 3 stories about the show on the front page of the SMH. Had lots of people talking about it. Had Breakfast TV talking about it.
Season 2, so it must be.
And we're doing season 2. And in terms of for SBS, I don't know exactly, John. You're the numbers cruncher, but
7th highest in SBS's history.
In SBS's history, and you know, up against that is, don't forget, there still is that view. And let's not kid ourselves, there still is that view that people go, Aboriginal stuff won't rate. And that's despite like a First Australians and despite, you know, programs that the ABC have made, and it's despite, and there still is that, you know, there still is that thing. So I guess what we try to do is find a way of tackling a subject that we might engage more people. And not try to engage the same people that always watch our stuff.
Yeah, I think that was the most compelling.
Yeah.
I think knowing that people watch that maybe hadn't sat down and watched a show about Aboriginal people before, very personally, I found that.
So it was about
exciting.
breaking through.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Can we play the clip?
What do people really think about Aboriginal Australians?
Petrol sniffing and drug taking.
They've got plasma TVs but no food.
I'm Australian, I was born here, just like they were.
Give them houses, they burn them down.
Aboriginal people are definitely more disadvantaged.
Get so much more than us.
Everything costs more for me, but why is it less for them?
A lot of freeloading.
Having this free ride and I'm working my ass off.
Classing themselves as Aboriginal to get more welfare.
I've had very little to do with Indigenous people.
When it comes to brains, unfortunately.
Aboriginal people keep using the past. Move on.
If you think it's racist, well, I don't fucking care.
6 out of 10 Australians have had little or no contact with Indigenous people. This group represents that 6 out of 10. All with strong opinions, they've agreed to leave their everyday lives behind and embark on a unique journey deep into Aboriginal Australia.
Welcome to Redfern, welcome to what we do.
Jasmine, a mother of 4.
I was to hear that life is hard because they're Aboriginal, I'd better say leave.
Food nutrition student, Alice.
I really align with the Indigenous beliefs.
Trent, a law enforcement officer.
When I hear Aboriginal people say that they can't get a job, I just think it's rubbish.
Supermarket worker, Bodine.
When I think of Aboriginal people, wasters.
Marcus, a part-time photographer.
People that think that Aboriginal families are bludgeoning are just crazy.
And mortgage broker, Sandy.
If the Aboriginal people are spending dole checks on booze, don't give them their dole checks.
Guiding this group of outspoken Aussies is award-winning journalist Ray Martin.
You know, the 6 have no idea what's going to happen to them. It's going to be a journey of surprise, I think, and turn their lives upside down. It'll certainly confront them.
If you got a fucking problem, you bought the problem, why don't you close the fucking pubs?
And I think it's going to be a real emotional roller coaster.
I don't think this is going to be very easy for me.
My worst fear.
For 28 days, the 6 will face their fears in a world they never imagined they'd see.
All right, and you go.
I'm not going to be able to stay in here.
The group's preconceptions will be challenged.
Oh my God.
Good evening.
You are in a crocodile territory.
They'll be tested.
You're now in Roban Regional Prison.
In extraordinary situations.
They're throwing rocks at the car, man.
Their beliefs confronted.
How can the fuck you be 1'8"?
Their emotions pushed to the limit.
I don't agree with it. It has to stop.
For the next 3 nights,
It's not fair.
follow 6 Australians
Look, my legs are shaking.
on a journey that could change their lives forever.
We just are trying to survive.
I'm shitting myself.
Just breathe in and out, just calm down.
Violence, confrontation.
I'm not staying.
It's not about the colour of the skin.
Get off your high horse, girlie.
There's no respect there.
This is the way it works here. I'm sorry.
I really feel like I can't breathe.
Fuck that, I'm not staying.
It's not what I was expecting at all.
You do not know what we feel.
So, Oh, you're shocked, are you, Jacob? I thought you worked on
It's been a
that.
while since I've just come out of therapy.
Yeah. So, Darren, you mentioned that you didn't want just to get the same audience. We weren't trying to speak to the same audience with that sort of project. Who was the audience you were imagining when you're producing that? Is it someone you're imagining at home that you want to shock on their couch, that you're trying to shake up, or whose perceptions are you trying to kind of address with that kind of
Like, I guess
material?
in making that, we were firmly trying to talk to the 6 out of 10. Like, we had a clear, like when we were trying to conceive of the show, the Reconciliation Australia, there's this attitudinal study that they've been doing to track if reconciliation works. And basically, they're tracking attitudes that, you know, the wider population has to Aboriginal people, and that provided, like, we're trying to find the frame or the way that who are we making it for, and actually it was to talk to those 6 out of 10 people, and we wanted people at home to watch, and we were going for people that shared those things that we all knew that people think, like, black fellas are lazy, black fellas don't want to work, why do they live out there, they get it too easy, why do they get all this money, they get Toyotas, they get all this shit, you know. And so we thought, and in that study, it shows that these views are held by people and common things, people, you know, that they think about Aboriginal people. So we're trying to talk to them in their homes, and hopefully it could be a more easy way of changing their mind. They could identify with the young 23-year-old supermarket worker who says they're all wasters, or, you know, Sandy, the really outspoken mortgage broker.
Yeah. I mean,
so
really
I guess we're trying to talk to those people that see themselves and have thought things and said things casually, that those people thought.
So you get them engaging, you get them debating, you have that big conversation on Twitter or whatever. Where do you take that conversation? What do you do with that engagement? Or is it just about sparking it?
I guess that's not that's the interesting, isn't it? It's what your role is in being a filmmaker or producer or whatever. I think the most important thing is to spark it.
Yeah.
I think that's the key, and then it's out there and people debate. I mean, it's interesting, a lot of people do ask what are the 6 doing now, and people think, are we going to find out about those? And I think that's always interesting about when you leave something alone and let it carry on. I think that's always interesting. You know, make another series.
Trish wants to say.
I just wanted to know, how did the communities respond to the show? The communities that you went to, and did they like what you did with it?
Yeah, they responded really positively. Like, for instance, I thought that the people on Elko Island really sort of laid themselves bare. Like, they had people staying in their houses, and they're living in houses that have been built 25 years ago, and nothing's, you know, like sort of town camps in a way, like in Alice. And I felt the most nervous I felt about taking a film back when we went back to Elko to show people there, and we sat, like, there was probably about 30 or 40 people came and watched, like, but especially the families, the 2 family groups whose houses we filmed in. And people spoke for a long time about it, and they said, well, no, we really want to answer our phone. And no.
I should have said that. Housekeeping, please turn your phones off. Especially, please. Yeah, good on you.
And they said, at the end, there was a consensus reached that people thought, and it was really people talking amongst themselves. They really said they want people, if this is going to go on national TV, maybe people can see how we live, and that will maybe help change something for us. Yeah. So I think people were generally positive. We didn't have a lot of changes, but we went everywhere. We went back and took the film to everywhere, and everyone that was depicted in the show, we went back and showed.
Yeah. What stage did you do that?
Rough cut.
Yeah.
And I think we changed. There was a couple of small changes, not big changes.
Nothing structural, nothing big.
We took it back though when it was after, and I guess the other important thing is we took it back after the network had seen it, because we thought it wouldn't be the right thing to do to take something back that was our cut, and then there was other comments happened on. So we were
then John gives you his notes, and everyone's got to change.
Do it after John had watched it.
Yeah.
But I think that's right, because otherwise you don't want to be changing things and not take an accurate thing that you're really
planning to show. Yeah. I might bring the other end of the table in a bit more. Rachel, so you've been living in Alice for a long time, you've got a long history of collaboration and doing work with Indigenous people. You're working with Trisha and Dena on projects like AFTRS and some upcoming documentaries. What's that collaboration been like for you?
It's been really positive. I mean, I'd really like to start by saying I'm a little bit uncomfortable, I think, being here. When we were developing 8FFM, one of our ongoing jokes was about the 8FFM, the M's are the missionaries, mercenaries and misfits who come and work in Aboriginal organisations. And
Which one are you?
Hey?
Which one are you?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. And one of our ongoing jokes was going to be this character, or the people who come and work for a couple of years in Aboriginal organisations, and then they become the experts in Aboriginal media, and then they go and talk in New York and everything like that. So I just want to sort of...
It's not New York,
I've never
don't
been to
worry.
New York.
Yeah.
I mean, I have been in New York, but not as as an expert in Aboriginal media or anything. But look, I've been very lucky. I went to Karma for a 3-month contract, and I stayed 5 years. And the first people I met at Karma, well, Dena was one of them, and Trisha, you were like a month or something after I turned up, and I went to Karma thinking, oh, I'm up to date with current affairs, I know what's going on and I learnt I very quickly that I know very little, and but I always had really strong Aboriginal people around me who would kind of go, no, you do that next, or you do that next, or you do that next. And so they trained me. I've been trained by Karma. And at the time, a woman called Cilla Collins, who I think a lot of people in the room would know, she was the CEO of Karma, an ex-executive producer at Karma. And even today, my general rule of thumb is WWCD. What would Cilla do? And I know that's a bit... for Christians and stuff, I know that's I've stolen that. But WWCD is generally my rule, like what. But yeah, no, I've been very lucky with the collaboration. So I've got some war stories, whether or not I say them.
We'll try and drag those out of you in a minute, yeah.
That's it, but.
So you mentioned your project Blown Away got some feedback about some people thinking it wasn't the right platform to tell Indigenous stories. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, Blown Away was a film we made with the ABC last year on the 40th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy. And in all films that we could find, the Aboriginal stories of the survivors had not been included, so we included them. And not only that, we sort of tried to find as many stories as we could from a cultural point of view about why people would have thought that the cyclone happened. And we had a number of letters to the editor, and I always find social media comments very interesting, but maybe that wasn't the right platform to include Aboriginal stories. And it's like, well, why wouldn't it be? I mean, they were survivors like everybody else. And the cultural thing, that the fact that some Aboriginal people thought that Old Man Rock in Darwin might have caused the storm was so offensive to people. And it's like, well, I think when people get offended, you've often got to look at yourself and why you're offended. But so it was interesting. It was out of all the things that I think people could be offended about, that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, right. You were blown away, were you, Rick?
I was blown away by the offensiveness.
Sorry. We've got a clip of Blown Away. Alan, if you wouldn't mind playing the stuff.
I wasn't prepared at all for the cyclone.
I didn't really know what a cyclone was.
It deliberately hit Darwin.
The wind lies like something out there wanting to come in and kill you.
We were just lucky we got out when we did.
That was it. My parents were just waiting to watch their family die before them.
I thought Barbara had been blown away.
And I looked around and I said, everyone's dead. We're the only people left alive.
We're just surprised that so many of us lived, we was alive. I certainly know that what we call the ancestral spirit protected us in some way.
I found her nursing this lovely little newborn baby wrapped in a space blanket.
There was nothing familiar about the place.
There was no trees, no houses, and we tried to walk back to the family.
Alan Stretton organised the biggest ever rescue operation in Australian history. The biggest airlift, the biggest evacuation.
Here they were running out to us with these blankets, wrapping us and hugging us and saying, you're okay.
These men are Commonwealth policemen. We received reports of the looting on Boxing Day.
It's a bit of a mystery, actually, the death toll.
I'll never accept the figure of 71.
I know people do
disappear. I know some who have.
There's a finite probability of getting a Tracy any wet season.
Just back off a bit, you know. Back off a bit in what you're doing to this place.
So Rachel, did you work with consultants on that?
Sure, yeah. We Daniel McClean, who's a Darwin-based director, and we worked with Larrakia elders, and they did a lot of consulting up there. James Bradley was the producer with me, and he's an editor that has worked with a lot of people in this room. And we consulted a lot, but I guess sort of just going back on, I don't know. For me, it's sort of like the offensiveness is, or it's like, I don't know, trying to find ways to bring Aboriginal stories into mainstream is sort of really interesting for us, Trish and I, and sort of maybe not looking at things only as mainstream, but bringing in Aboriginal stories as well. That's kind of.
What's your take on that, Trish? What do you see the challenges in doing that, and what do you think are some new things you're trying in that space?
Well, God, I think we just try everything that we possibly can to try, because I think a lot of people make the mistake of separating Aboriginal people from Australia. No, we are Australian.
Yeah.
And so, when you have a school system that teaches Australian history and Aboriginal studies as two different things, that becomes a problem. But so it's. Look, because Rachel, I know people are constantly thinking of Brindle Films as an Aboriginal organisation, but it's not. It's a film. It's a film production company that happens to have one black fellow and one white fellow in it. So, but trying to find a way to marry those two things and bring them into their rightful place as Australian stories it's like sometimes hitting your head against a brick wall. Because you go to commissioners who are also still saying, after all these years, that people aren't interested in Aboriginal stories. And that becomes really frustrating, especially when you have a look at, the popularity of Redfern Now and First Australians and all of these other great projects. So it's still, we're still feeling our way through, trying to sort of bring them together as well.
So it's interesting, we've got this situation where commissioners might be saying that, but we've got so many people wanting to tell these stories, it's the new orange. Here we are, talking about it, I guess. What's happening, do you think, in terms of that disjuncture? Do you think it's about going the way these guys have tried to in terms of approaching different audiences for that content, or is it about, how do you marry up that kind of the intense interest in this kind of these sorts of stories and finding ways through to kind of connect with audiences or through the commissioning process to get to those audiences?
I don't know. I think you speak. I think sometimes the commissioners, and I'm probably going to bury myself with this one, but I think sometimes commissioners don't exactly know what they're looking for either. They use big terms on what they're looking for, and then you bring them something that you think is what they're saying, and they go, oh no, that's not it. And so you're constantly changing it and bringing it back, and it's still not it. So I'm still confused in that area as well. These guys seem to have nailed it.
I think Trisha's right though. The interesting thing, and you said before, what did Aboriginal people think at the communities that we went to for first contact? I think Trisha's right. They want to see themselves in shows that are just like all the other shows. So they were like, yeah, God, and we were saying like, so it's constructed documentary, and they're like, yeah, so reality, like you're bringing these people, like is that like reality? They're like, yeah, we want to make that. So we're trying to talk about like, and these people do this and this and this. They're like, oh yeah, we get it. They'll come and we'll be, like, yeah, great. Like, why didn't you just say that? That's what you were.
Survivor.
Yeah, but I think that is a really...
It is
people
really
want to participate just like everyone else.
Good story. It's a good story.
Yeah, it's just people are wanting to tell good stories, but I think the people with the money have preconceived ideas of what Aboriginal stories should be.
There's a nice parody that you're part of that we've got a clip of, Destiny in Alice, that's a little parody of some of that ethnographic work that Penny was talking about before. We might show if you've got that, Alan.
at the heart of one of the harshest environments on the planet. And I've discovered that this town, surrounded by desert and scrub, is home to a rare species that is not only surviving, but thriving. It has become the lesbian metropolis of outback Australia.
G'day. G'day. Hi, how you doing?
Let me take you on a journey into this unique and fervent world of women who love women. Here we are in a typical lesbian house in Alice Springs. Now, let's take a look at the paraphernalia scattered around this family home. The untrained eye might miss the lesbian identifiers and mistakenly ask the women of this house if they have boyfriends. Scanning the bookshelves, we gather some clue as to the sexual orientation of the house's occupants. Wonderful! Sarah Waters books. Sarah Waters is the author of some of the most erotic lesbian novels on the planet. And for those of you who don't know, tipping the velvet is Victorian slang for cunnilingus.
Okay, we might end it there, Alan. Thank you. That's brilliant, Trisha. I could have watched the rest of that tonight. That's fantastic. I know. So, I don't know what to say about that. I think we might just move on because that was just brilliant.
Did you collaborate? Did you have any lesbian consultants?
That's actually really interesting. I mean, people think that the Aboriginal consulting process is really tricky. But it's not. It's actually just talking and talking and communicating and being really transparent. And, talking to Aboriginal people is not tricky. But the lesbians of Alice Springs, that was a different story. No, I know, and they're lovely people, and they really are. But I think people take themselves very seriously. In Alice Springs, I guess, and other places. But yeah, the consulting for this was kind of really interesting because it was harder in a lot of ways than I think maybe the Aboriginal people of Central Australia are so used to being documented and so used to being subjects of media that they're kind of used to the consulting process, whereas perhaps the lesbians were less so. And it was very tongue-in-cheek. It was such a tongue-in-cheek film.
Okay.
What? No. And I don't think they expected it.
Okay.
I don't know,
I'm going to have to wrap that up. Here we go. Okay, so I'd like to talk now a little bit more about the role of consultants. What should the relationship look like? Darren? How might this change at different times? I know, I've got questions for you, Dena. They're coming. Well, Dena, what do you reckon? What do you think the relationship should look like with consultants?
I think just transparency really is the most important thing, and honesty. I'm consulting on a big series at the moment, and I think the best, and the thing is that getting an Indigenous consultant or an Indigenous collaborator on as early as possible is the best thing, I think. Mm-hmm. Because then, there's the opportunity where you can pinpoint or highlight obstacles or things that might be an issue, or, the best way to get from A to B to Z and that as well.
So how do you know you're talking to the right people? What if you've got a range of locations? What if you've got a range of views that you're engaging with? Darren, do you want to?
I think Dena was right. I think the other thing is it's good to talk to both sides. Say you're only going to work with one side, or you're only going to work with one group, for instance. I think that's the thing that I've learnt that is good process, is talking to both sides and saying, look, we're going to talk to them, and they'll go, you shouldn't talk to them. And I think that's often a good way to go, well, you should go and talk to them. Yeah. And they may not be, and even if it's to say to them, we're not going to really work with you, but this is the project that we're doing, and we've decided that we're going to tell this story, and unless you think there's something compelling or why we shouldn't do it, or that's they're full of shit or whatever. But I think that's often a good thing as well. Like, don't just go, oh, well, I'm working with this person, so they're my little Aboriginal, person that's saying that you're good, Darky, let's go forward. And I think you need to be mindful that there are other viewpoints, and you should be talking to those people. Yeah. But you may not going to work with them. So. Yeah, and I think, I personally think the most important thing to go into these consultation processes with is respect. Being and respect's got to go both ways. So there's no, you go into a situation, you talk to people, and if you're going into an Aboriginal home as you would anywhere else, you go into that situation thinking, how would I like me and my family to be portrayed? And so if you're going in with a disrespectful attitude towards how you're going to portray that family, you think, would my own family want to be portrayed in this way? Would I want to be portrayed in this way? And I think that's one of the first things you have to have in mind.
So it's do unto others.
Yeah.
Penny, how do we tell when a project's got it right?
Look, when a project's got it right, it's an easy read. All of the support materials are there, and it's usually like we said, a collaborative effort. There won't be just one little attached letter of support for the project, but there'll be an Indigenous DOP on the project. There'll be possibly a Indigenous co-producer on the project. It just becomes very obvious. The good ones go straight through, Sam, don't they?
Yeah, I mean,
they're
it's kind of, you know it when you see it, kind of thing, in both respects.
Yep.
The worst cases are the ones that come into us who haven't called us and haven't identified. It's gone way over their head that actually what they're doing will involve Indigenous content, and they tick the no box. No, there's no content and no Indigenous content, and then it lands on our desk and it's like, well, hang on, that's of course
Clearly,
there is.
yeah.
Can I just put in a question here?
Sure.
And do you do anything different when they, for instance, want to make a film about Lebanese?
We don't require a Lebanese consultant. No.
No, you don't.
We don't.
Actually, we are about to initiate a project on representation in TV drama. I can talk to you about in a minute.
But we do. I mean, there's not a box for that, but there's still, we're still assessing the whole application, and we're looking at what the involvement is with the communities and with the appropriate groups and, whatever organisations or government bodies there might be in that. So it's not quite the same, but it's there. I mean, we still are looking for that kind of involvement and engagement with the communities.
And then the danger is that then you get sanitised films. It's a really
or respectful films.
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's been situations where projects, I won't name projects, where I think that the consultation process was very scary for the non-Indigenous company, and that they were very aware of the issues involved and very aware of possibly offending people. So they actually didn't record any people. And this is a story that's, taking place in the outback where there is a huge Aboriginal community. And that is a very scary thing on the other side, where the non-Indigenous filmmakers are so worried about the consultation process that they don't even include people, living in those places, and that happens. And you're sort of like, well, what on earth is going on here? Where are the Indigenous people in this landscape? They're suddenly not there because you were worried about offending, and that doesn't work either.
And there's probably examples of where Aboriginal people have got it wrong. Okay.
Exactly.
I think we should be honest about that. There's examples of where Aboriginal people get it wrong as well.
And that's an important thing to remember, and that's what you've heard a lot about here, is that every Indigenous filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, or even that's working in drama or whatever area, are undergoing the same process.
Yeah,
they are also finding consultants. They are not experts on all subject matter. You know, if they are going to a certain territory or WA or something to make something, then they're finding a local consultant there. And there's also a difference between community consultants and bringing on filmmaker consultants as well, because that often happens when people are putting in applications. They're looking for a last-minute consultant, someone to sort of sign off on their project, and they look for an Indigenous filmmaker consultant to have a look at it. And there's been situations where often the Indigenous filmmaker has sort of said, go down this path, here's some networks, follow this up, given a lot of free time to that, and really don't hear back about the project. Project goes ahead and
But your
really
name
no
gets
consultation
put on
took place whatsoever.
the
So
application.
there's no one size fits all, and it's like Trisha said, it's about a matter of respect. It's also, if you're getting to a situation where you're putting in a funding application or, you know, for a project and you're still looking for a consultant, you really have to start to question why you're doing this film. You know, what right do you have to tell this story? And, you know, if you're, often happens in our department, Caius and I, during just before a funding round for the documentary department for development or production investment, we get bombarded with phone calls from non-Indigenous filmmakers looking for a last-minute consultant to put in an application. And it's astounding in this time, and I think that the success of all of these filmmakers that you see in front of you and others is a little bit at the detriment of their own success, because now there is, you know, so many people wanting to make more Indigenous films, and it's just about, we don't stop that, it's just about doing it the right way. And these are successes because, you know, Darren and Jacob are in a company together making these films. You know, Trisha and Rachel and Dena, they own companies. They're embarking on these journeys from the concept, from the very early idea together. They're not just bringing on someone last minute to tick a box.
I think one of the issues Rachel and I have is we get producers who call us who want to make a story, say, with the Walpri or the Pinjarra or someone from the top end, and they just automatically assume that I will be the consultant on it because I'm Aboriginal. And it's like you've got to sit down and explain to them, well, actually, you need to get somebody from that area. You know, if you were looking at the Nmadjara, I'm your person. But if you're looking at any other tribe, then it's, you know, you need to go there. And one of the most important things is for you, the producer, to build those relationships as well. Not to just get somebody else to go in and do the consultation for you while you're on the phone or Skype from anywhere else in the country. Get off your butt, get on the plane, and come to those places and make those relationships yourself.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I've had experiences which I won't delve into, but before Blackfellow Films as well, and I think there's a fear factor amongst non-Indigenous filmmakers often. It goes into that bracket of, this is one big hassle and it's going to go wrong and we don't know what we're doing, and like either shut down altogether or go about it the wrong way. I think, you know, it's interesting how, and you've obviously got great processes in place to inform and educate that, but I do think that needs addressing too, because it's not always from a bad place.
No.
It's just a position of genuine ignorance and fear, which isn't a great starting point.
No.
You know.
So I'm going to open to questions in just a sec, but I just wanted to kind of sum up. So we're talking about a real getting off your bum, having a strong relationship, trust, respect, honesty, transparency, all those things. Appreciating that even with all that in place, some things can still go wrong. Mm-hmm. And I guess one of the things in talking about this we were kind of discussing, and Darren really wanted to emphasise, is you don't necessarily expect all blackfellas to agree about the right way to tell the stories either. So there's a range of views out there. You're not going to keep everyone happy even if you've got the right process in place. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Darren, before we open up?
Yeah, like I think First Contact was, you know, a case in point of when we were making that, we knew what we were trying to make, and the communities that we were making it with knew what we were trying to make. But then when we got to that sort of end bit, like Penny saw it and was at Cuts, and we worked with SBS and Screen Australia, and there was Aboriginal people saying, God, you shouldn't have made this. Why are you letting, you know, these white people have these views about Aboriginal people on television? So there still is room for people to have those views. You know, it doesn't mean just because we're Aboriginal that we're all going to agree. And I think that's another interesting thing that we should all, start that conversation as well. Just because we're all Aboriginal, we don't necessarily all agree about what we all like, the same as that we don't like the same food or whatever. Like people don't have to like all these films or all of our content because it's Aboriginal content. I think that is probably an interesting thing just going forward, that we're going to make stuff that is challenging and not like the same way that, I don't know, all Australians don't like MasterChef or whatever,
Just a final one before I throw open, because we have been perhaps a bit hard on our commissioning friends in the room. Some of the people on this panel have been on both sides of the commissioning desk. And Dena, I might throw to you, because you're one of those people. I haven't asked you that many direct questions. What do you, in that process, what do you see that works and doesn't when people are coming to you to talk about a project?
I think, when I was a commissioning editor at ABC, I was probably in a very unique position where I worked in the Indigenous Department, and a lot of the filmmakers that we worked with were Indigenous and, were going down that path of consultation and collaboration with community members and stuff. And then for the non-Indigenous filmmakers that, were just kind of coming to us with ideas and stuff, it was about having those conversations about what they wanted to do and kind of just pointing them in the right direction and saying, referring them to processes and people that could help them in that situation. I mean, my time there, I didn't really have anything where the wheels completely fell off, thank goodness. But there were a few instances where we made programs and there was a consultation process, and then other people outside of that disagreed with what was going on. But, and then that was a case of investigating, did the filmmaker go to the right people or go down the right path and stuff. And it was a matter of, going back and speaking to the filmmakers and, telling them the situation and going, what processes did you do and who's this person, and, just kind of getting to the bottom of it. And 9 times out of 10, it was someone who didn't like that filmmaker or didn't like the way that story was represented. And you're not going to make everybody happy. So yeah, I was kind of blessed in doing that.
Great.
And yeah, and then on the outside, going through this whole process of consulting and stuff. And one of the things that I've also found with being transparent and building relationships with communities and stuff is that the stories that you want to tell, if you make those relationships and get off your butt and go to those communities and stuff, you meet people and you learn stories that are far better than what you could have ever thought of.
And that's kind of what we say too, is that the projects are only better for all of this process that happens beforehand. You only get a stronger project from
Exactly. It should never be seen as an obstacle, that sort of level of collaboration. And that's not just for documentary, that's right across the board with everything that's coming in. Even we have a massive abundance of drama projects. Actually, that's on a massive rise, I think, after the, Sapphires, and now suddenly there's some real commercial gains by Indigenous stories that maybe weren't there beforehand. And the same level of collaboration and consultation needs to take place in that area as well to make a better story, to make a better film. It's not an obstacle. Do you want the tourist version of the film? Do you want to display a tourist version of the film, or do you want all the layers and the depth? Do you want a surface film, or do you want something with some real authenticity?
So beyond the experience we have on the panel, you have great experience in the room. I'd like to throw open to you guys now to ask questions and perhaps add to the conversation. I would ask that people identify themselves before asking questions for our benefit and for the benefit of the filming. Obviously it is being filmed. And also, I think if anyone is kind of here in a journalistic capacity, we'd perhaps like to know that as well, because there may be some people here in that capacity as well. So I'm going to throw open to questions.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Roth. I'm, I guess, an emerging producer. I'm developing a couple of documentaries. It's kind of a two-part question, just about consultants. So first of all, I wanted to know, I'm working on a small web-based series, and just the capacity at which, say, an individual can act. I mean, if it's a case where you're just interviewing somebody about their relationship to the land and Australia, the capacity to which they act almost as their own consultant. If you're doing a very, very small project where you don't have a huge crew, and I'm looking at getting together stuff as teaser footage, I guess, to apply for funding, the capacity of that. And then also, if the consultants you're looking for, if they necessarily have to be filmmaking consultants, or if you're looking for people who are quite high standing within communities, because my, I guess, goal was that because I'll be working with a number of different communities, that I was hoping to talk to a number of people within there. And if there's a guideline for if it's an elder within the community or somebody like that who can act as a consultant, or what sort of level of filmmaking or media experience they need to have.
Do you want to take that one?
Sorry, it's really hard to just sort of supply you with a one size fits all. So it's small web-based stories in different communities.
Yeah, so it's kind of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people working with a body painter, exploring the landscape that they choose to be painted into, and why they choose that landscape, and so on. So it's very, very early stage development. And I am kind of looking for an Indigenous co-producer, but I guess I don't feel like having a co-producer is going to be the one-size-fits-all thing either, because obviously the different nations and everything like that.
I think I think it would certainly be a good place to start, is to find some Indigenous filmmakers to talk through your project. But it's really going to also come down to where and which communities you plan on filming in. And yes, there will be a different community liaison that you will have to find in each of those places. And there won't even be just one of those as well. You know, you may need to get permission from several people, or you may need to consult with several people. But I mean, maybe that is a good way to start, is to find another Indigenous filmmaker to just collaborate with you, or just give you some ideas on where to go from here. And, you know, we're all the Indigenous filmmakers, not all experts, but certainly have a big network of people usually that can point you in the right direction for other places.
And just like further to that, it's also your talent that you have. If they are from that community, then have that conversation with them and say, you know, do we need to talk to other people in this community to get the permission? Yeah.
And I guess it depends also if you're just looking at their own particular philosophies on their relationship to the land, or if you're looking at a cultural dreaming story in connection to that. Because if it's dreaming, then you're going to have to talk to the whole community. But if it's just their own individual perspective, then I think.
Yeah, and if your talent is Indigenous, they will be able to point you in the right direction. Yeah.
We got more questions? Martha?
I've got a little question. And it doesn't just apply to Indigenous people, but it certainly does, because there have been so many films made. You know that there's an impulse in documentary to give a voice to those who don't have a voice. Now I'm going to ask you, where does the money go? You make a film, you tend to make a profit. I do.
Who makes profit making films, Martha? Wow.
Well, you know, and where does the money go?
Where does the money go? It goes to I know the film, I can only talk about what we do, but some of the money goes to the other key creatives who've worked on the show, so writers, directors. Some of the money goes back to communities. Some of the money goes to run a company to develop other content. That's the places that most of our money goes to. So it's kind of a mix, you know, a mix of places. Some of it goes to, that's sort of the places, key creatives, community, and to develop like other projects.
So how do you decide that?
I think you negotiate that stuff up front, and you're up front with the communities, you're up front with the people that you're working with. It's in contracts with some of the directors and writers that you work with.
Because we will pay consultation fees, we'll pay location fees, we'll pay talent fees, all of that. We try to pour as much money back into the community as we can.
Well, I think that's important, because what I see in documentary is the filmmakers have their career and they make a living, and the people who are in the films, they're still poor.
Yeah. Well,
I think all
I
of
can
us
say
all
is
pay
all
people
I
that
do
we
is
work
make
with.
a living. I'm not rich. I don't have a massive house. I make a living. So.
Certainly, even as Sam and I were talking, and the applications that do come in, and when we know that they're authentic, there's always line items, and we do look in the budget to make sure that money is put aside for paying, custodians for shooting on their country, to consultants, to, all of those people are usually, they should be paid from the production budget
and that's
for their
question,
services.
Sorry, Penny, but that's a question that we're asked quite a bit, is how much to pay a consultant. And we've said, basically it's the same as what you would pay any other sort of expert consultant in a documentary. So it's at that kind of level. But of course, it depends on the level of involvement of them and what else they're doing. I mean, it's also a bit of a how long is a piece of string, but we expect to see something reasonable in there for them.
Is there ever a profit share or anything like that?
That's what I thought that's what your question was afterward. That's what I was talking about. But absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know, I haven't really come across many
profitable
documentaries that made profit.
Anyone? Yeah. Other questions?
Right up the back corner there.
Oh, yeah?
Hi,
Hi.
my name's Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
I'm a student at Metro Screen. I've been there for about 3 months. Not that AFTRS isn't great, but I've done one short documentary, and in 3 months I've already had to deal with 2 incidences of racism. And so I'd like to direct my question to Darren. In shooting such arrogant and offensive material, like what they come up with, how do you maintain your professionalism and get the job done, knowing that these people think this way?
Yeah, look, I was fortunate because I was ahead of them most of the time. I was ahead of the crew. So one thing that we thought was important, because it was a show about their attitudes about Aboriginal people and their first contact with Aboriginal people, we thought that wouldn't necessarily be first contact if they met me first. So, because we didn't want to, the cameras weren't on me. So we had to make sure that the first contact was
Darren.
with the people. Otherwise, as Rachel Perkins said, she said, well, they might go, well, hold on, you're okay. Maybe anyway. So we didn't.
A very short show.
I didn't talk to them. But in terms of, I think Trisha's absolutely right. It's about respect. And it's even when you're making other films, like we made the film The Tall Man, and people had very diverse views about Cameron Doomadgee, who was the man who passed away in that film, and people said terrible things. So it's not just only in that kind of example of like racism. You're going to encounter people who have views that you don't necessarily share or are sort of very opposed to the views that you have. And I guess that is part of the process of making films, to be able to take on those views that you don't necessarily have to have conflict but your I guess your role, and I see our role, is in presenting that complexity, because often when you can examine or portray and discuss or give space and give voice to all of those views, it makes for a richer understanding, and through seeing some of those opposing views. But if you're talking about racism in terms of making films or people being, are you talking about subjects or?
Probably both.
Both. Yeah, I think that... Yeah,
I didn't realise that you were ahead of it. I thought you might have been behind the camera steaming
Certainly
away.
there was a point where we all caught up, because they were like, we keep seeing this guy and he's everywhere we go.
Running ahead.
And he seems to be there, like he's in a car, So they obviously realised that I was everywhere they were, and that wasn't we weren't on the same trip, because it wasn't
In your experience, has it been a prevalent issue?
Look, I think, when we made The Tall Man, like, for instance, you get into a taxi from the airport and they go, oh, yeah, mate, what are you doing up here at Townsville? And we go, oh, making a film about that Doomadgee. And they go, oh, those bloody abos on Palm Island. And, oh, fucking hell, like, they drink and they do this. Yeah, you get it all. Like, if you choose to engage and you choose, like, people just like they do in life have very strong views. And some people are just more forthright about sharing them.
Well, I don't know.
But, look, I don't, if your question is it sort of upsetting or hurtful, like, I guess it's just all from our own experiences. Certain things are more upsetting, and I guess that's where you need to talk to the people that you're working with and crews, and try and sort of talk about those things. But and then some of it forms part of, like, I don't know, these mob, like some of those things, stereotypes and views inform or become part of the work. Like,
whole comedy series.
But I think sometimes, because I don't know about you guys, but I've grown up with a lot of that anyway. So you sort of learn to put a wall there and not take it in too much. Otherwise, you're just going to be boiling constantly and wanting to, flog the crap out of everyone. So you put a wall up there, and you have to, as a filmmaker, you have to remain objective. If you want to tell the story properly, you have to sit back and not take it in personally.
Thank you.
We got any more? Oh yeah, up the back. Thanks. So it's very hard to see.
So hi, it's just sort of, my name is Jade Christian, I work for NITV, and I just wanted to really just follow on from what Trisha and Penny and Dena and Rachel, and it's obviously Darren has also said about consultation. It's also understanding that with each community that you go to, that it is very different. You can't have one size fits all. You can't go like Trisha said, can't go to somewhere in Alice Springs and expect that the same kind of consultation that you'll have in those communities will be exactly the same kind of information, cultural information, as it is in Western Australia, in the Torres Strait, which is also very culturally diverse. And those cultural experts that you have on your productions really add value to your productions, and they also are quite wise. So it's really important as you as practitioners, or all of us as practitioners, really listen to that cultural advice that you're actually being handed to. So that's all I just want to say.
Any more questions before we wrap up? I have a quick question.
Yeah.
My name is Sam. I'm a student here at AFTRS. I'm doing the graduate diploma in screen business. One of my projects that I'm working on at the moment is exactly this, so it's perfect that. Thank you very much for coming.
Anything we can do,
Appreciate
Sam?
it,
Yeah.
'cause it's definitely for me, I feel. But this may be a little bit of, I guess, an ignorant question, but I think, Penny, you mentioned before how there's a lot of projects coming up which are drama projects. You've spoken a lot about documentary tonight. Where do you draw the line with being, I guess, culturally sensitive and respectful when you're adding some creative and artistic license to beautiful stories and stories that people hold dear, and particularly about the dreaming and things like that? How far can you kind of stray from having your own spin on it, particularly as a non-Indigenous practitioner, without stepping on too many toes?
And this is a drama project you're talking about?
Yeah. So it's not documentary. So, say if someone wants to do a project and they want to tell a dreaming story or something like that, but it's, maybe it's I'm thinking hypothetically.
Okay,
here.
I was about
It's
to say,
not that
no,
actually
don't do
happens
that.
as
You don't have to do that.
A television series or something like that, and it's a mix of, maybe, a crime kind of drama, but you've got these stories that have been interwoven in, but there's some artistic license there. How far can you try?
Darren's done a lot of drama, but I'll just say from the early writing perspective, if this is something that you're writing yourself,
I'm not.
If this is a hypothetical, feature film with a lead Indigenous character, and it's a non-Indigenous writer, I would say that you should be doing the same process that you would do for documentary. You should be collaborating and bringing on an Indigenous writer or other key creatives to make sure that you are portraying these stories appropriately and properly and with the respect that they're needed.
I guess in terms of if you're thinking about those dreaming stories or those things, that is like people's religion, or it's like dealing with works of non-fiction. That's their stories and their, you know, it's like biography. So I guess you should think of it in that sort of similar way. And I guess like we made a telly movie about Eddie Marbo's life, and he passed away, but we worked very closely with his family. And so of course sometimes you try and, you know, for the story, you know, we spoke to Benita, his wife, like, can we, you know, say that meeting didn't happen really in Brisbane, but it happened, we want to make it happen at home, could we do that? So you have to consult and have those conversations and, you know, discuss them. So I think you should treat it probably like it's a work of non-fiction.
Yeah, and I wouldn't take too much creative license with the dreaming story itself. You can take creative license with the characters, you can take creative license with the situations, but not with the story itself, because they're like Darren said, they are religious stories.
The other thing to point out too is to bring it back to those opening stats. We have such a wealth of great Indigenous creatives now in Australia that we should be drawing upon collaboration. You know, it's sort of one of those. It's not like we're kind of starting from nothing in this space. It's kind of good to tap into all that skill and that professional kind of craft that's already there. On that note, I might wind up and ask you all to join me in thanking the panel for their generous insights. Oh, and Tom has some things to say. And I'd also like to thank Alan for an amazing job at last minute with all the tips. Thank you. And thank you to Pat and OzDox for having us.
Thank you for being here.
And thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.